Okay, good morning, everybody. Good morning. So this is the real boss here. And I always promise that I won't ask her to say anything to a new group. So she's going to say a short greeting.
Oh my God. Okay. Good morning, brothers and sisters. I'm very happy to be here for the very first time to be Austria. And so many positive points I can say. First of all, as airplane landed, the already landed is so pretty, and everywhere so beautiful and so clean, which I really love it. And desk is solid, the chair is very solid, house is so beautiful. But most of all, like I felt yesterday, we were STF members together, and I felt very sincere spirit from young people. And I put so much hope for the Austria and also the European movement. True mother trusts Mike so much, and but if she only trusts him, I think it didn't happen. But she trusts European leaders and members, each one of you. So together, I'm sure we can bring a victory to every parent and to parents. Just this morning, it reminded me the one Manhattan church minister's dream she had on the ocean. We are on a boat, and such a long boat, and the two parents are leading this boat, and we are inside. So I hope that every one of us were here in the boat, and we want to be in a God's winning team. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much. It's good to be back. I was looking at the banner outside and realized already 2 months have passed since I was here for the wonderful annual reunion. And today I'd like to speak with you briefly on the topic, Open the Eyes of My Heart. Of course, that's a well-known Christian song. Maybe you know that song. It really became a favorite of mine about 3 years ago. And the situation was we were on a tour of America's holy grounds. So for those of you who don't know, when True Father came to America in 1965, almost the very first thing he did after spending a couple of weeks in San Francisco was to go to 48 of the 50 states in America and to create a holy ground. And being True Father, he wanted to do it very quickly. In fact, he gave himself 6 weeks to travel throughout America, and often that meant making 1 or even 2 holy grounds in a day. How many of you have been to America? Most of you, right? It's a big country. And in those days, there was no GPS, no kind of computers to tell you the quickest way and how to save time. You just had to look at the map and kind of guess, where shall we go in order to make a holy ground? And many of the holy grounds turn out to be near zoos, because I think early on they realized if we go to the zoo, there'll be a park. And also if there's a park, we can go in, we can be free, we can choose the place to make the ground for prayer. But over the years, to tell you the truth, at least personally, and I think for many members in America, we kind of forgot about the holy grounds. To tell you the truth, in many states, they're not in the main city. They're not in a place that's either convenient or even practical sometimes. In some states, the zoo expanded, and now the holy ground in Lincoln, Nebraska, the holy ground is inside the monkey cage. So the only regular participants at the holy ground are the orangutans. They like to swing from the holy tree. And so we had to make a new tree outside of outside of the monkey cage. So life goes on. But anyway, towards the end of this tour, because it was 43 days, traveling every single day by bus. I stayed on the bus for 43 days, and people came and went on the tour. Sometimes we had 100 people, sometimes just 20 or 30. But I particularly remember coming near the end and driving through Idaho, and driving up the Snake River Canyon in Idaho. And it's very dramatic. Actually, the rover has carved out a deep canyon, and there are tall mountains on each side. And they're very bleak. There's no trees, and just rocks, and it was a gray, dark day. And to tell you the truth, really quite depressing. So I'm sitting on the bus, looking out the window at these bleak, barren hills, and reflecting about the reality of, what happened in the last 50 years, because that was 2014. Father made these holy grounds in 1965. So 50 years passed. And, as we traveled around America, we realized that in some cities, things have moved well, but in many states, they haven't. And in fact, in Idaho, just a few months before that, the state leader had passed away, and there was nobody left willing to be the pastor of a whole state. So by the time we got to the next state, which was Montana, it was evening time, it was almost dark. And, I had fallen into a difficult space, kind of reflecting back over history of the past, influenced by these bare, barren hills, and kind of wondering, how really is God going to save this nation? If after 50 years, we've come such a little journey. Anyway, I was the president then, so I had to pull myself together, and we had to move on. And the next morning, as we drove towards Seattle, Washington, the countryside changed. We entered what's called the Cascade Mountains. And here the mountains are covered with trees, millions and millions, billions of them probably. Everywhere you look, every tree you look, every hill you look are covered in trees. It was such a contrast from the day before. And suddenly, this doesn't happen too often, but I really felt God was sitting next to me on the bus. He said, look, I want you to look out at those hills. And I want you to think about all those trees. I want you to compare that with how you felt yesterday. And he said, you have to realize that when you see empty, barren hills and loneliness, I see hills that are covered with life and hope. You have to think that each of these trees is like a soldier in the army of God. You see nothing, you see nobody. But I see millions and billions of people waiting to be called into action. It was such a powerful kind of transformation. And then this song came in my mind, open the eyes of my heart. Let me see things the way you see them, the way God sees them. And I think this is such an important skill, but it's also an art. It's something that has to be learned. If we step back a bit, we realize that all problems in human history come because people could not see things the way God saw them, right? It says that in the beginning, in the Garden of Eden, the problem was Adam and Eve saw things differently than God, their father. The principle goes on to explain that, of course, this led to a series of actions and behaviors that led to the fall of man, the misuse of love, the sexual mistake that lies at the core of human sin. But True Mother has kind of said, let's think about what happened before Adam and Eve got there, before they got to the point where they made that terrible final mistake. There was a pretty significant period of time where they began to see things wrong. Right? Instead of seeing things with the pure eyes of the children of God, they began to listen to the voice of Lucifer, of Satan. They began to see things from their viewpoint, and it was different from God's. And because of that, they found themselves in a space where they could make a mistake. If in fact they had kept God's perspective from the beginning, there would have been no chance of them making that final tragic mistake. It didn't just happen one day that Eve decided she would fall with Lucifer. It was the result of many weeks, months, of slowly allowing herself to see things from her point of view. Naturally, as human beings, we like to think, my point of view is the right way. Does anyone here not think that your point of view is the right way? Of course not, right? We all think, I'm right. And other people may be nearly right, depending on how much they agree with me. It's not many people who can think to themselves, honestly, I may be wrong. I may have misunderstood, fundamentally, the situation. I mention that because, in reality, from time to time, I need to check myself. Am I seeing with the eyes of God? This is not a matter of being, a leader or better or worse than anyone else. It's just a fundamental question that every one of us should ask. Am I seeing things as God sees them? If I'm not, then the chances are I'm not going to be in a very good space. I think fundamentally, if we don't see things as God sees them, we're going to be miserable. We're going to be unhappy, and we're going to be filled with doubt and even fear about what the future may hold. That's why I'm very interested in this quote from the second book of Kings, the story of Elijah and Elisha. In general, if you look at the Old Testament, you can see kind of a rhythm, a pattern between times when people were aligned with God and times when they weren't. And, it's interesting how slowly we learn, because when people aligned with God, things went well. The country prospered, the kings were righteous, people had good crops, their children flourished, the nation was at peace. And then what happened? They began to think, that's because of us. That's because we're such great people. And then they began to see things from their own perspective, and gradually they became selfish, and things went badly. And the record shows we never learned. It's very difficult for people to recognize, why are things difficult today when they were better years ago? Because we lost our vision of who we really are. And this story of Elisha and Elijah, or Elijah and Elisha, I don't know exactly how you would say it, is interesting to me because there's a little backstory to it as well. I'm not sure if you know that. Anyway, Elijah was the man, right? He was the great prophet of Israel. We know now from the principal perspective that God wanted to send the Messiah at that time to work side by side with Elijah, just as God wanted Jesus and John the Baptist to work together. So he really was a major, significant, powerful leader. And perhaps you've read the stories of how he challenged and defeated the prophets of other religions. He established kind of a great winning persona. But like everybody, the time came when he would have to ascend to the spirit world. And God actually revealed this in advance. And the day before this story, Elijah told Elisha, his disciple, it's time for me to go. And you should now move on by yourself. But Elisha said, no, I'm going to go with you until the end. And so they walked together, and everywhere they went, people told him, do you know your master's going to be taken from you today? Today is the day that he's going to go, and you're going to be left alone. And Elisha had to say, yes, I know, calm down, it's going to be okay. But then finally this incident where he asked, I want to have double your spirit. I want to not just be, someone who carries on passively. I want to do more than you did. And this reminds me deeply of True Mother's conviction that it's her task to do more than when Father was here alive on earth. And I know some people have a problem with that. They think, no, the right thing for all of us to do is simply to try to do a little bit of what True Father did. Father was great. He's the Messiah, the Savior, the true parent. Therefore, maybe I can set myself the challenge of doing 10% or 50% of what Father did. That would sound like a humble statement, right? But it's not. That's like John the Baptist saying, he must increase, but I must decrease. In other words, our course is fundamentally different. It takes real guts and conviction to be able to recognize that actually God wants us to do more. Father always used to speak about this, right? He said every parent wants their children to be better than themselves. It's just a natural human nature, and it's God's nature too. He wants his children to do better than he did. So I think it's very natural and appropriate that True Mother has decided, you know what? I want to do more than I could do when Father was here. That is real loyalty. That is real piety. And I'm sure when Father looks down, he's happy to see that, happy to see. There's at least one person who's convinced that we can do more, that we can actually do better than we've ever done. So that's True Mother, but how about us? How about you and me? Are we ready? Are we convinced that we can do more, we can do better than we've ever done before? Or might we feel, well, Father is gone and our movement has struggles staying united, and look at the world the way it is. This great conflict between Islam and Christianity. There's violence and warfare. There's global warming. There's every kind of problem. Let's be realistic. Survival might be a good option. And maybe, 50 or 100 years from now, some other generation can take up the pieces. But this is 100% the wrong way to think. I'd like to read you now just a little quote from the Champomakyong. By the way, there's new a handy travel-size version of this book, I'm very happy to announce, because the old one was extremely heavy. And why I love this book is because Father is very candid about his own course and the struggles that he went through and his motivation for doing this work. So I should have marked the page, but I didn't. But let me find it. Okay, I'm feeling I'm going to read something different. When True Father went to the United States in 1971, he said, "I came as a doctor and a firefighter. Although heaven had thoroughly prepared the United States as a stronghold for the free world, the nation had deviated from its original direction of upholding God's will and instead stood at the crossroads of life and death because of its decadent culture, family breakdown, and communist infiltration. True Father knew how hard God had worked to nurture the United States, which was facing such threats. he was compelled to go to the front line by himself once more to save that country. You know, recently we celebrated in America the 40th anniversary of True Father's beginning public speeches to America. And even though this is not America, I would like to encourage you to read those speeches to get a sense of how Father thought at that time. When he was speaking at Madison Square Garden in 1974, he began by saying, "I didn't come here to tell you something you already know. I came here to share with you a new revelation from God." And he said, "I'm not asking you to believe it just because I said it, but I'm asking you to open your mind, to open your eyes, to pray about this message, and to go home and to think about it." And in that, Father began to explain the real purpose of Christianity, to explain how Jesus came not to die on the cross, but to inaugurate the kingdom of heaven, to have a family, to begin the new lineage of God. It was really a very radical speech. And the fact of the matter is that many people disagreed with it. In fact, if you look at the video of that event, you'll see that from about 5 minutes after the beginning of speech, people were leaving the auditorium, quite a lot of them. And by the time it was over, half of them had gone. In fact, Father couldn't even begin his speech in the beginning because there was so much commotion. So he sang a song. He sang a song to calm people down, and then he began to give his speech. Later on, he said, you have to think about what does it mean to be a doctor and a firefighter. So first of all, think about a firefighter. When a firefighter comes to a house and it's on fire, the first thing he'll do is to knock on the door, right? To see if anyone is awake, can open the door. But what if there's no answer? Meanwhile, the house is burning. So the firefighter has an essential piece of equipment, an axe, right? And it's his job to break down the door or the window, even if it's locked, and force his way inside with the assumption that the people inside are either already overcome by smoke or they're asleep. They don't know what's going on. Can you imagine a firefighter coming to a house that's burning, ringing the door, knocking the door? There's no answer, so they get back in the truck and they drive away. And later on, they say, well, you know, we tried, but there was no answer, so we just left. You know, that is not the job of a firefighter, right? The firefighter has to be willing to smash down the doors in order to save the people. So, you know, I think about that myself. Am I willing to smash down the doors, to break down the barriers, to even transcend normal human behavior in order to tell people the house is on fire? We need to wake up. That takes guts, right? It takes courage. It takes a willingness even to look foolish. What happens if the firefighter breaks in and there is no fire? It's a false alarm. But still, I think you'd agree with me, he has to do that. He has to take action, and there's no time to think about it either. You can't sort of think, well, let's have a meeting now, let's discuss what to do. Maybe we'll take some consultation here and decide whether we should go in this house or not. No. The firefighter in that moment of crisis has to be bold and take action. And let's think about the doctor. What does the doctor have to do? Father said it very well. You know, what happens if the patient pushes the doctor's hand away? The doctor wants to maybe touch the infected part, maybe has to cut it out. But the patient is fighting and struggling. No, don't touch me. But again, can a doctor say, well, okay, patient's rights, patient doesn't want me to touch them, so I'm not going to operate. I'm not going to go in and cut out this cancer, cut out this disease that is killing the patient. Can the doctor say that? No. Doctor can't say, well, the patient didn't want it, so I left them alone, and they died. So to be a doctor also needs guts, right? It needs the confidence that I can save this person. And even if they don't want it, even if they feel that I don't know what I'm doing and I'm hurting them, I'm going to take action. This was Father's mind when he came to the Western world. You know, it's America, but in reality, Father was coming from Korea to the Western world, to the home of Christianity, with the task of reforming God's providential religion. He tried to do that in Korea in the late 1960s. If you read this book, you'll read about the early efforts Father made to wake up and inform Korean Christianity, but he couldn't do it. He tried, but he realized this is not going to work. I need to go west. And so he went to the Western world to deliver this message of reformation and revival. When I was here last time, my next stop was Germany. And I noticed that outside most churches in Germany, maybe it's the same here in Austria, I'm not sure. But outside all the Protestant churches in Germany, there's a big sign celebrating 500 years from Martin Luther. And there's a little stage about this high, maybe 2 meters square, and an invitation. Stand on this stage and tell what you stand for, right? In the words of Martin Luther, here I stand. Ich kann nicht anders. I can't do anything else. I must stand for something. And I believe that the challenge for our nations, for Europe, for our community, is to stand up for what we really believe and to be confident as firefighters and doctors to bring that message to our fellow countrymen and women. You know, when True Mother says that she trusts Europe, but she's also frustrated because it's here that all the resources are located. It's here, if you think of the spiritual history of Europe, it's here that God poured out his heart and his desire for 2,000 years, wanting to make the foundation for the second coming. That's the only thing that it's all about. You know, sometimes I have to remind myself, and I think we all should, that all of the things we see around us, even in this city, for example, there's nothing that has purpose and value if it's not for this time of the second coming. That was the reason that God invested in Christianity, why the providence moved from Israel through Europe, eventually going on to America and the world. But to understand that, we have to open the eyes of our heart. We have to see things as God sees them. And it's not easy. It is not easy. During the recent Seungwa in Korea, while Mother was praying, you know, I was trying to listen. Wasn't easy. Translation was sort of delayed. But I noticed around Mother this kind of glow, an aura about 6 inches outside of her body. And I thought, well, it's probably my glasses. You know, I've been meaning to get the prescription changed for a year, so kind of took them off and I cleaned them up and I put them back on again. And it's still there. You know, take them off again. And, you know, I didn't want to admit that maybe God was allowing me to see something that was beyond purely the physical. According to the divine principle, we have 10 senses, right? 5 physical, 5 spiritual. And the key is to get our spiritual senses resonating with our physical senses. But let's be honest, that takes hard work. It's much easier just to see things with our physical eyes, just to see things the way everybody else does. It takes an act of will to begin to see them the way God does. So I don't want to go on for long. But I do want to say that it's my conviction that the best days of our unification movement are ahead of us, not behind us. That this is the time when all the promises that Father made to God can be realized. Not only that, the best days of Europe are ahead of us as well. Because if in fact our nations rise up and respond to the call of God, the future is going to be great and glorious. You know, Mother has constantly challenged me. She said, you know, other nations are going ahead. Look at Africa, where In a couple of months, the president of Senegal is inviting other presidents to come and hear True Mother speak in Dakar. Or look at the Philippines or Thailand or Nepal, nations which, as we see in the weekly video reports, are experiencing great success to some level with the blessing and other amazing things. It's good. But the reality is that those are not the nations that are going to lead and influence the world. They're not. But this is one of them. This is a country, and there are many in Europe, that could be the lighthouse for the future kingdom of God. The challenge is really ours. And it starts by a humbleness, a willingness to see things as God sees them, which means denying yourself. It means denying what you see with your eyes and recognizing it may be wrong. It may be that God sees me differently than I see myself. I may see myself as being not particularly effective, not particularly chosen, but what if God has actually chose you to be a historical victor, somebody whose name will be remembered 500 years from now more than Martin Luther? It could happen, right? If we build God's kingdom in Europe, people will remember our name. And I think that time has come. So I will conclude here. I want you to keep one thing in your mind in this coming week. Take some time each day and ask God, show me how it looks from your eyes. Show me what it looks like from the eyes of God. I think our Father will be more than willing to give you a glimpse into his vision and his expectation of our lives and where this community is going to go. Let us join in prayer. Our most loving Heavenly Parent, ever since the beginning of history, we have struggled to see things the way you see them. We listened rather instead to the voice of the devil who told us we were sinful, evil, and had no hope of ever building a world of peace. Today, there's not a single politician, not even a religious leader who can really say with confidence that we're going to build the kingdom of God. But our true parents are different. And Mother has made herself your spokesman, your spokeswoman, simply by seeing things the way you see them and having the confidence to declare that it's going to be different. Many of us in this room have been walking this path for 40 years or more. Others have known nothing else our whole lives. But even we have to admit that sometimes our eyes are clouded. Our minds are jaded. We don't see the possibilities anymore, but only what we didn't do right. But if we have courage as doctors, as firefighters, then we have to act. The time is now. The need is now. And I believe great blessings are waiting. Please bless this community here in Vienna, in Austria, throughout Europe. Father, let us have the scales drop from our eyes and see things as they really are. In his speech, Father said, if you understood the meaning of this time, you couldn't stand still. You would go throughout the world singing songs of glory and praise. Father, please help us to come to that spiritual state where we see things the way they really are as you see them. And I thank you and I pray and report this together with all my brothers and sisters here in the name of all of our blessed central families, and report it in the name of Michael and Fumiko Balcomb, a blessed central family. Aju. Okay, thank you very much, everyone.